Okay, this is my celebration of learning for EDU 3300. So basically, I'm going to go through what I learned throughout the course, the application of learning, my greatest takeaway, my field placement explanation, and my closing remarks. So basically, this is what I learned in EDU 3300. Basically, in week one, we just discovered what a disability is in our own words through watching the Intelligent Minds video on Vimeo.com. And basically, disability in my own words is any perceived impairment or condition that a person could have that makes it difficult to show their intelligence or do everyday tasks in the world. And this is important going forward and having this foundational knowledge because this class was all about teaching students with disabilities. Then we talked about SDI, HLPs, EI, and II, weeks 2 through 5. We made this like anchor chart with big ideas in special education. And I mean like kind of like a coat rack to like hang up in a classroom or like just to visualize it easier for me. And specially designed instruction is curriculum designed specifically for students with special needs, identifies the students' needs, abilities, and strengths. And then high leverage practices go within specially designed instruction, and there are practices that support student learning that are effective and efficient. And then two high leverage practices are explicit instruction and intensive instruction. Explicit instruction is an HLP that's an instructional framework for SDIs. It focuses on clear instruction with modeling and concise wording. And then intensive instruction is instruction when you're intervening to fill the gaps for a student with disabilities, and you're furthering explicit instruction and re-explaining and remodeling. And then we read this big ideas in special education article. Next, we learned about the errors of special education in week 7. In this PowerPoint, we learned that the first error was the prehistory. Then we had the era of institutions, the era of public schools from 1900s to 1950s in special classes. Then we had the era of contemporary reform in the 1960s to the present. And basically this kind of pulls us, this timeline I found kind of pulls us through where like originally in the pre-1800s, students with disabilities didn't attend. And then there was like this idea of eugenics. And then there was the era of institutions where they were just all housed, and that was like Willowbrook and everything, even though that took place later. And then there's this specific classrooms where students with disabilities were excluded. And there was the era of contemporary reform where we're changing things, we're including them in the classroom. There's the inclusion movement. Then we had the themes of special education, which we also talked about in week 7, which was like treatment, changing conceptions from qualitative versus quantitative, shifting emphasis on nature versus nurture, and paradigm shifts, which is like new is not necessarily better than the old ways. And like in education, we're focusing on nurturing those who have disabilities, and we take treatment on all different levels, like the medical values, what they are like diagnosed as, and then as a society, we treat them in a certain way, and culturally we have different treatments, and morally within our households we have different treatments. Then we had certain legal cases that were fundamental in design or in special education history. The Brown v. Board of Ed in 1954 basically said that anyone with disability needed to be included in school, not segregated. Diana v. Board of Education said that testing could not be biased and that ELL students were not considered students with disabilities. Park v. Com of Penn basically ensured FAPE. Mills versus Board of Ed of DC basically made sure that districts accredited certain funding for special education. And then Hedrick Hudson v. Raleigh talked about FAPE for all of those with disabilities, and that they need to get an education and an IEP and all that. And basically FAPE is free, appropriate public education for everyone. And Andrew v. Douglas County School District in 2017 basically worked off the Rowley case and made it so that education had to be appropriate and like have some sort of goal. Like they couldn't just be learning, they need to be making progress. They shouldn't have just been in school, they need to be learning something. Then there was 3 waves of legislation in special education. Basically went from access, so they couldn't be segregated and they were allowed in schools. Then it was a focus on learning. And then finally, it changed into an accountability for learning and progress monitoring, progress reporting. And basically it went from access in the Rehabilitation Act to then Public Law 94-142, where schools must identify and serve all children, educate to the maximum extent and appropriate with non-disabled peers. And then finally, 3 was like Public Law 102-119, IDA, PL 105-117, and then 2001, No Child Left Behind. And then also like the Michigan Educator Evaluator laws, all talked about increasing standards, increasing accountability, increasing accommodations, including transition services, and required students with disabilities to be included in state testing. And this was all like learned in week 9 in the law and prevalence presentation. Then we talked about teaching ELL multilingual students, and who are they? Someone who does not have the native language of English, and we now usually refer to them as multilingual students. And they're varying different level of academic and social emotional needs. We learned that BICS is basic interpersonal communication skills, which is conversational, social, everyday language. Fluency takes 1 to 3 years. CALP is a little bit more complex. It's cognitive academic language proficiency. It's school textbook, takes at least 5 years. Teacher strategies to use are lesson prep, pre-teaching, building background, scaffolding, which is I do, we do, you do. And we learned this through the slide decks on November 19th. Then we were assigned all of these chapters, and my first chapter was chapter 17, and it was the choice exceptional learners or 2E learners, and this was my group project with Riley. And basically it's when a student holds evidence of exceptionality or giftedness, but also has a disability. And this usually means for teachers, there's a lot of behavioral issues, difficult seeing the exceptionality or disability because one is being masked. And strategies are to develop the gift, but accommodate the disability, teach ahead and circle back, activate prior knowledge, and allow them to write something of their interest. And I included this picture of Albert Einstein because he was a twice exceptional learner and he was extremely gifted. And we could have these students in our classroom. And so it's important to know this and know the strategies for teaching them so that if there is an Albert Einstein in our class, like they're allowed to reach their full potential. The next chapter was chapter 16, and this is What Really Works by Wendy Murawski. And this is early childhood special education and the focus on inclusion. And basically in the chapter talked about access, removing the physical barriers of a classroom to promote SWD's engagement in learning opportunity. Talked about participation, including individualized accommodations, adaptations, and supporting teachers, help young children actively participate in the class, and supports are providing supports to personnel who are involved in early childhood inclusion efforts. And then strategies are physical and social environment that promote social emotional competence and universal design for learning and embedded intervention. Then there was a chapter about moderate to severe disabilities, and this was chapter 14, What Really Works in Teaching Students with Moderate to Severe Disabilities. And there's not really a clear definition, but moderately to severely disabled students need more intense support and specialized instructions. An educator should use evidence-based practices and obviously high leverage practices that address disability-specific needs to provide intensive, explicit instruction within a broader general curriculum. And strategies are time delay, self-management, modeling, naturalistic intervention, opportunities to respond, prompting, visual, and like kinesthetic or exercising in learning to really help them learn at their best. Then we read about chapter 12, searching for the miracle cure, working with students with emotional and behavioral disorders. And really for this, you need to develop a behavior intervention plan, or it's not really you, it's a lot of specialists too, and a functional behavioral assessment, which is like collecting data. And these are working documents. And it's important to note that most behaviors are attributed to 5 function, which is attention, escape avoidance, power control, sensory attainment of something. So I think that's just important to have some background in this as a future teacher to know where these emotions are coming from. And basically the FBA's or the functional behavioral assessment is to clearly define or operationalize the problematic behavior, then systematically determine the frequency and duration of the behavior. And strategies are opportunities to respond, peer tutoring, self-monitoring, and building a relationship with the student so you know where they're coming from and they feel comfortable with you. And then there's learning disabilities in the classroom, which is like an invisible disability from What Really Works in chapter 11. And then okay, and basically with these students, many students with learning disabilities have their own unique needs and areas for development. You have to plan for high quality intensive instruction to promote high levels of learning. And they usually just have difficulties in memory and general strategy use. So some strategies for that are mnemonics, EVPs in general, and then encourage transferability, like this skill or strategy is good using in this other form. Cognitive instruction, skills of self-monitoring, graphic organizers, and supplement oral, like lectures with the visuals, so you're not just like talking at them straight. And then these were just really influential research to my learning. A lot of the cedar things that were in like week 7 or 8, for our discussion board and that flyer, which really talked about a lot of high leverage practices. Um, and then application of my learning. I use this in my field placement. I incorporated a lot of HLPs like explicit instruction, collaboration, positive and constructive feedback, positive environment. And I use my knowledge to have like good conversations and to take notes to be able to write my post field placement reflection and have like good conversations with my cooperating teacher. I also use this in PED 4640 with Dr. Trumbull. I use EVPs and HLPs in my lessons like collaboration and explicit instruction. I also taught HLP 9, teaching social behaviors, of the high leverage practices in special education document through CEDAR, or maybe not through CEDAR. And I established a consistent, organized, and respectful learning environment, which is the HLP 7. And I was able to the outcome was I was able to teach the class and was graded higher by Dr. Trumbull. And then EDU 3210, Theory and Principle of Reading Instruction. I had a placement at Coolidge Elementary, and I had a student with this disability. And I walked him through guided reading lessons with practices from what really works. And this outcome was the child was able to focus and experience learning, achievement, and growth, and his behavioral issues went down. And then this image is just like what I used in PED 4640 for class expectations and protocols to have a positive learning environment. Then on my retail job at Leapy, I applied this learning. I applied HLPs like having a positive environment, using assistive technology, using multiple sources of information to assess a person's strengths and weaknesses. And the outcome was a greater experience for my customers. Customers didn't return shoes as often. I got great reviews. I was the top salesperson, and I had higher attachment rates. And then also through substitute teaching, another job I have, I applied these HLPs such as explicit instruction, creating a positive environment. And like specifically, I was really bad at teaching math to elementary, and it became a lot better when I was using collaborations, multiple opportunities to respond, and there was less behavioral issues and greater learning from students. My greatest takeaway was definitely learning about these high leverage practices, because I'm going to be held accountable under the Michigan Educator Evaluation Law to educate those students, especially with special needs. And the easiest, most effective way for me to do this is through HLPs. And I've learned many applications of how HLPs are extremely effective and easy to use. And like I know like good situations and like when's appropriate and like which one to use. And in the article, High Leverage Practices and Evidence-Based Practices, a Promising Pair, says these critical practices, also known as HLPs, should be those that research have demonstrated can impact student achievement and can be used across different contact areas and grade levels. And HLPs can provide infrastructure to support effective teaching and consistent learning for every student. And basically, I want to be an effective and great teacher. So this is my greatest takeaway, because I want to be graded well. I want to stay a teacher. This is my field placement explanation. I was with Miss Larissa Horventinovich at Northville High School. She's a special education teacher. She co-taught chemistry and algebra 2. She had a resource room for 11th and 12th graders. She also was in charge of all the accommodations for the SAT for Northville High School, and allowed me to engage with the students and discuss the process of an IEP and referral process. And I was able to put things together for the SAT. And this is one of the guide note sheets I got to help create for the chemistry class. Mrs. H co-taught, and I was able to like make some accommodations, which was like guide note sheet. My lesson plan was in her resource room for 11th and 12th graders. It was about job applications for preparing from the real world. So basically, I had this job application and I used many HLPs, like explicit instruction in modeling exactly what to write in areas of confusion. And I used technology like the docu-camera. I activated prior knowledge, which is an EVP, asking them if they've held a job or they know why a job application is important. While they filled it out, I gave them feedback and gave it back to them, positive and constructive feedback to help them get really good at this. And I recapped at the end of my lesson to see if they felt more prepared to fill out a job application by asking them what they felt like the purpose of it was. And then I exhibited the Madonna University Franciscan values at my placement. by having the respect for the dignity of each person. I built a bond with each student in the co-taught classrooms and resource room, and I work to build trust and be kind. I practice equality to students no matter what, treat them like all students of God. And then for education for truth and service, I use my education to serve the students and help them with math and chemistry. Um, I learned from my mini lesson by also serving the class and teaching them a lifelong skill, filling out a job application. And I use my background knowledge of the workforce to serve each student and not to like withhold or gatekeep anything. And my last remarks is that I'm really grateful for my experience in EDU 3300. I had a lot of great experiences. I had a great field placement with someone who's so knowledgeable, so nice, made me feel really included at Northville and really get valuable experiences. I have so many resources and all those documents and that What Really Works book. I mean, I took so many notes in the class to really take with me and keep with me. I have so many skills to take with me and like knowledge of how those skills worked for me in the past. And I have a lot of foundational knowledge that will stick with me about like HLPs, SCIs, and just why special education is the way it is because of all the past legal cases, what IDA says, and what I'll be held accountable for under the Michigan Future or educator evaluator law.